You know, when we talk about the human body, especially in these deep dives where we're really trying to understand the machinery that keeps us alive, we usually gravitate toward the
Oh,
superstars.
yeah.
We talk about the heart beating away like a drum, or the brain firing billions of neurons, or, the lungs expanding and contracting. They're loud, they're obvious, and they demand attention.
Right.
But today, I want to look at something different. I want to talk about an organ that sits quietly in the background, deep in the shadows, usually completely ignored until the moment it decides to wake up.
And when this one wakes up, it doesn't just get sick, it gets angry.
Angry is the word that kept coming up in the research. We are looking at the pancreas today. And honestly, before reading through this stack of papers, and we have some heavy clinical pathology material here, I thought of the pancreas as, well, boring.
A digestive sponge.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a digestive sponge, but the reality is so much more volatile.
It is definitely one of the most paradoxical organs we possess. It's a Jekyll and Hyde situation.
Yeah.
On one hand, it's this quiet, essential worker. It helps you digest every single meal you eat, and it meticulously controls your blood sugar so you don't pass out. It's benevolent. But on the other hand, if you mistreat it, or if its internal blueprints get crossed, it initiates a sequence that is essentially biological self-destruction.
That is the phrase that really stopped me in my tracks. Autodigestion. We are going to unpack that term today because it sounds like something out of a body horror movie. The idea that an organ can literally digest itself.
It is a terrifying concept, but it is the central reality of pancreatic pathology. That is our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just skimming the surface.
Right.
We're going to take some high-yield clinical medical material, the kind of stuff medical students use to prep for their board exams, and we're going to translate that into a narrative about this dual personality organ.
Okay.
We need to understand its anatomy, its chemical weaponry, and I use that word advisedly, and the congenital blueprints that sometimes go wrong before we can understand why it turns on itself.
I like that framing. We're treating this like a bomb disposal unit examining a device.
That's a great way to put it.
We need to know how it's wired before we figure out how it blows up. So, let's start where we always should. Location and identity. When I try to mentally place the pancreas, I honestly have a hard time pinning it down on a map of the body.
A lot of people do.
I know it's in the abdomen, but it feels elusive. Where exactly are we looking?
The reason it feels elusive is because it's hiding. To visualize the pancreas, you have to look deep. It's what we call a retroperitoneal organ.
Retroperitoneal. Okay, break that down for us.
So most of your abdominal organs, like the stomach, the liver, the bulk of the intestines, they are inside the peritoneal cavity. They're sort of floating in this sac, which makes them relatively accessible if a surgeon opens you up. But the pancreas is different. It's tucked away behind the peritoneum, behind that lining. It's plastered against the back wall of the abdomen.
So it's not floating out front. It's buried in the back foundation.
Exactly. It sits transversely, meaning it's lying sideways across your body.
Sideways. Okay.
Yeah, imagine a bridge. On the right side of your body, you have the duodenum, specifically the C-loop of the duodenum, which is the very first part of the small intestine coming off the stomach.
Right.
The head of the pancreas is nestled right into that curve, like a ball in a catcher's mitt.
Okay, I have that visual. The head is tucked into the gut on the right.
Then, the body of the pancreas stretches across the midline, over the spine and the major blood vessels, all the way to the left side of the body,
All the way across.
where the tail of the pancreas tickles the hilum of the spleen.
So it really is stretched out like a hammock or a bridge between the gut and the spleen.
It is.
That explains why back pain is such a common symptom when something goes wrong with it. It's sitting right on top of the spine nerves.
Precisely. It's deep real estate.
Yeah.
And getting to it surgically is a nightmare because of that location.
Oh, I could imagine.
Now, in the research you sent over, there was this interesting note about the name itself. Pancreas. It comes from Greek, right?
Oh, it does. It comes from the Greek pancreas, which translates to all flesh. Pan meaning all, creas meaning flesh.
All the flesh.
It sounds distinctly unappetizing. It makes it sound like it's just a slab of meat, a filler organ.
That is the great irony of the name. The ancient anatomists might have looked at it during a dissection, thought, okay, this doesn't have a hollow chamber like the stomach. It's not pumping like the heart. It's just a fleshy filler organ to keep things from rattling around.
Sure, yeah, just padding.
But as we now know, it is arguably the furthest thing from being just flesh. It is a sophisticated, high-tech chemical factory. It's not a passive slab of meat. It's a dual system organ with two completely different personalities operating under one roof.
And that leads us perfectly into the next segment.
Yep.
The two personalities. The sources break this down into the exocrine pancreas and the endocrine pancreas.
Right.
And the difference in scale between these two is wild. I think most people, when they hear pancreas, they think about insulin and diabetes.
Right, which is fair because that's a huge part of its clinical importance.
Huh.
But structurally, that's the minority.
By a lot.
By a huge margin. So first we have the exocrine pancreas. This is the workhorse.
The heavy lifter.
Absolutely. According to the pathology data, the exocrine portion makes up about 80% to 85% of the entire organ.
So the vast majority of what we call the pancreas is this exocrine system. And what is it actually made of? The source mentioned acinar cells.
Correct. Acinar cells. Structurally, these are pyramidal epithelial cells. If you looked at them under a microscope, you would see that they're arranged in little grape-like clusters called acini.
Grape-like clusters.
And these cells are absolutely jam-packed with membrane-bound granules.
And this is where the dangerous chemical factory analogy really kicks in.
It really is.
Because those granules aren't just filled with water or structural fluid. They are filled with what the source describes as digestive weapons.
That is a very fair description. Those granules contain proenzymes, also known as zymogens. You can think of them as biological explosives that are designed to break down the three fundamental building blocks of life: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates.
It's interesting you call them explosives, because looking at the list of what's in there, it really is an arsenal.
It is.
We aren't just talking about generic digestive juice. Let's list the arsenal here, because the specific names of these chemicals really highlight how complex this is. We have trypsinogen,
Chymotrypsinogen,
procarboxypeptidase, proelastase,
proelastase,
polycrenogen, and prophospholipase A and B.
It sounds like the inventory list of a very dangerous chemistry lab, and each of these targets something specific, right?
They do. Trypsinogen and chymotrypsinogen are designed to cleave proteins. They are protein eaters.
Okay.
Proelastase, that breaks down elastin. Think about where you find elastin. It holds your blood vessels together.
Oh, wow. So if that gets loose.
You start degrading your own blood vessels. That's why severe pancreatitis can cause hemorrhage.
Unbelievable. Then you have phospholipase. That breaks down phospholipids, which are the main component of cell membranes. So that enzyme is effectively a cell wall buster.
So we have protein eaters, vessel dissolvers, and cell poppers.
That's a good way to put it.
All stored in that 85% of the pancreas, the exocrine part.
Right.
They are sitting there waiting to be deployed into the gut to digest your food.
Exactly. They are manufactured, packaged, and stored. But they are sleeping. And we will get to why that is so critical in a moment.
Okay, so that's the heavy lifting side, the 85%. But then we have the other personality, the one everyone knows about.
The endocrine pancreas.
The source says this is only 1% to 2% of the organ's mass. That seems incredibly insignificant compared to the exocrine side.
You might think so, but this is a classic lesson in small but mighty, or punching above your weight class. The endocrine pancreas isn't a solid block of tissue. It is composed of these tiny clusters of cells called the islets of Langerhans.
Islets of Langerhans. Great name. Sounds like a vacation destination.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they are literally little islands. They are scattered throughout the gland, floating in that sea of exocrine acinar cells.
And despite being only 1% of the mass, these islets are doing something crucial.
Absolutely vital. Unlike the exocrine side, which skirts enzymes into a duct to go to the gut,
Right.
the endocrine side secretes hormones directly into the bloodstream. We were talking about the big players: insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, and pancreatic polypeptide.
So insulin and glucagon, we're talking about blood sugar control.
Exactly. This tiny 1% of the pancreas controls the entire body's fuel system.
The entire body.
Yes, think of it as the Federal Reserve of the body's energy economy. Insulin tells the cells to store energy to open the vaults. Glucagon tells them to release it. It regulates systemic metabolism. Without that 1%, the body loses its ability to process energy effectively.
So you have this strange dichotomy, a massive exocrine factory making dangerous digestive enzymes to break down food, and a tiny endocrine control room regulating what happens to that energy once it enters the blood.
It really is two organs in one, and they have to coexist in the same housing.
But let's go back to that exocrine factory for a second, because this is where the danger lies.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that those enzymes, the trypsinogen, the chymotrypsinogen, are like bombs. If the pancreas is made of flesh proteins and fats, and these chemicals are designed to dissolve proteins and fats, how does the pancreas not just dissolve itself immediately?
That is the fundamental biological engineering problem of the pancreas.
Hmm.
If you were designing a machine to hold acid, you wouldn't build the tank out of something that dissolves in acid.
Of course not.
But the body is made of the very things these enzymes destroy. So the body has developed a very sophisticated safety mechanism. We call it the safety pin concept.
The safety pin. I like that image. Break that down for us.
So remember those names you listed?
Sure.
Cyanogen, chymotrypsinogen?
Yeah.
The suffix ogen is the clue. It indicates that these are inactive precursors. They are zymogens. They are the bomb, but the fuse hasn't been lit yet. The active site of the enzyme, the part that actually does the cutting, is blocked or folded in a way that it can't work.
Okay, so the weapon is manufactured, but the safety is on. It's inert.
Correct. The pancreas creates them, packs them into those granules we talked about, and keeps them inactive. Then these zymogens are secreted into the ductules and ducts of the pancreas.
Right, the plumbing system.
They travel down this plumbing system, this network of tubes, and exit the pancreas, entering the duodenum.
And that is where the magic happens.
That is where the activation sequence begins. It is strictly location-based. The enzymes are not supposed to turn on until they are safely inside the intestine, mixed with the food.
So what pulls the pin? What turns the inactive trypsinogen into active trypsin?
It's a chemical trigger. There's an enzyme sitting on the wall of the duodenum called enteropeptidase.
Enteropeptidase, okay.
I like to think of enteropeptidase as the key master. It lives only in the gut.
The key master, got it.
When trypsinogen travels down the ducts and finally hits the gut, it bumps into enteropeptidase.
And the key master turns the key.
It performs a proteolytic cleavage. Basically, it cuts off a tiny piece of the trypsinogen molecule. That little cut changes the shape of the molecule, and boom, it transforms into trypsin.
And trypsin is the active form.
Trypsin is the active form, and here's the scary part. Trypsin is the commander.
The commander.
Once trypsin is activated, it then activates all of the other proenzymes. Goes around cutting the safety locks off the chymotrypsinogen, the prolistase, the prophospholipase. It sets off the chain reaction.
So it's a cascade. Enteropeptidase triggers trypsin, and trypsin triggers everyone else.
Yes.
That ensures they all wake up at the same time, but only once they are in the gut.
Precisely. It keeps the explosion outside the factory.
But biology is messy. What if something leaks? What if a little bit of trypsin accidentally gets activated inside the pancreas before it leaves?
A good question.
Maybe a stray chemical reaction happens. Does the whole thing go up in smoke?
The body has thought of that too. It's all about redundancy.
Right.
The pancreas actually secretes a fail-safe chemical alongside the enzymes. It's a trypsin inhibitor, specifically one called SPNK1.
SPNK1. That sounds like a license plate.
It does. Serine protease inhibitor, Cazal type 1.
Wow. Okay.
And think of SPNK1 as a fire extinguisher or secondary safety lock. If a small amount of trypsin accidentally activates inside the acinar cells or the ducts, SPNK1 binds to it immediately.
It just grabs it.
It handcuffs the trypsin and neutralizes it before it can go and activate the other enzymes.
Wow. So you have inactive storage, the zymogens, remote activation in the gut, the enteropeptidase, and an internal inhibitor just in case, SPNK1. It's a triple redundant safety system.
It is, and it works perfectly until it doesn't. But before we get to the failure of that system, which is the angry organ part, we need to talk about the blueprint itself.
The construction of the organ.
Because sometimes the problem isn't just the chemistry, it's the construction of the building.
Right, the congenital anomalies. This part of the research was fascinating because it shows how complicated it is just to build a human. The source material goes into detail about how the pancreas forms in the embryo, and honestly, it sounds like a complicated origami project.
Biological origami is the perfect way to describe it. In the embryo, the pancreas doesn't start as one piece. It's not just a seed that grows. It starts as two completely separate pieces of tissue, the dorsal primordium and the ventral primordium.
Dorsal meaning back, ventral meaning front.
Roughly, yes.
That's it.
The dorsal primordium is the larger piece. It eventually forms the body, the tail, the superior part of the head, and the accessory duct of Santorini.
Okay, so most of it.
The ventral primordium is smaller. It forms the posterior head and the main drainage duct.
So you have these two separate blobs of tissue floating near the developing gut. How do they become one organ?
Rotation. As the gut develops, the ventral part, the front piece, actually migrates. It rotates around the duodenum, swinging around the back, and comes into contact with the dorsal part.
So it moves.
It moves, and then they fuse together to become a single unified organ.
That sounds Risky. You have organs moving and twisting around each other?
It is risky.
Yeah.
And as with any complex construction project, sometimes the merger doesn't go according to plan.
Right.
The source lists a few specific anomalies where this process glitched. The most common one is something called pancreas divisum.
Yes, pancreas divisum. I was surprised by the numbers here. The source cites an incidence of 3% to 10% of the population.
Think about that. That's up to 1 in 10 people potentially walking around with this.
Wow.
If you're in a room with 10 people, statistically, one of you might have pancreas divisum.
What exactly is happening in pancreas divisum? Is the pancreas split in half?
Not physically split, but functionally split. It's a failure of the plumbing systems to fuse.
The plumbing?
Remember, the dorsal and ventral parts are supposed to connect their duct systems so everything drains out the main exit. In divisum, they don't connect.
So they stay separate.
Functionally, yes. And this creates a drainage problem. The dorsal part of the pancreas makes up the bulk of the organ, most of that enzyme factory we talked about.
Right, the 85%.
Normally, it drains through the big main duct, the papilla vater. But in divisum, because it didn't fuse, that massive bulk has to drain through a tiny little opening called the minor papilla.
I see the problem. So it's a traffic jam. You have 85% of the factory trying to push its product through the back door instead of the main loading dock?
Precisely. It's a plumbing mismatch. Trying to push a large volume of fluid through a small pipe can lead to inadequate drainage and increased back pressure.
And back pressure in a pipe full of explosives. That sounds bad.
It is controversial in the medical community, but many experts believe this predisposes the person to chronic pancreatitis.
So it's a setup for failure.
It's a structural setup for inflammation. The fluid backs up, the pressure rises, and the system gets stressed.
Okay, so that's divisum, a plumbing error. Then there's one that sounds even more intense, annular pancreas. The source calls this a ring.
Annular pancreas is a very visual anomaly. Remember we said the ventral part rotates around the gut?
Right, it swings around to meet the back part.
Well, imagine if it doesn't just swing around, but actually leaves a trail of tissue that completely encircles the duodenum.
It wraps all the way around.
It wraps around the gut like a ring or a collar.
And since the pancreas is solid tissue and the duodenum is a soft tube,
it acts like a chokehold. As the person grows, or if the pancreas becomes inflamed, it physically squeezes the duodenum. This can cause obstruction.
So food can't get through.
Exactly. It's a mechanical blockage caused by the organ growing in a ring shape where it shouldn't.
That sounds incredibly painful. It's like the organ is strangling the intestine.
It effectively is.
Yeah.
It often presents in infancy with feeding problems, but sometimes it isn't discovered until adulthood.
Moving on from the structural defects, we have ectopic pancreas. Ectopic usually means in the wrong place, right?
It does.
Like an ectopic pregnancy.
Correct. Ectopic pancreas is when we find pancreatic tissue growing in abnormal sites where it absolutely doesn't belong. It's found in about 2% of postmortem exams.
So you could have a little patch of pancreas growing in your stomach or your intestine.
Exactly. It can be found in the stomach, the duodenum, the jejunum, or even meccal diverticulum. It's basically a developmental restive piece of tissue that got lost during embryology and decided to set up shop elsewhere.
Does it function? Does it make enzymes?
It can. And that's the problem. While it's often asymptomatic, just sitting there unnoticed, it can cause issues.
How so?
Remember, this is active tissue containing digestive enzymes. If it's sitting in a part of the stomach lining that isn't protected against those enzymes, it can cause localized inflammation, pain, or even mucosal bleeding.
It's like having a rogue factory branch opening up in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
That's a great way to put it.
It's unregulated and dangerous.
And it can mimic other diseases. You might think someone has an ulcer or a tumor, but it's actually just misplaced pancreatic tissue behaving badly.
And finally, the source mentioned the rarest anomaly, agenesis.
Which simply means the pancreas never formed at all.
I assume that's catastrophic.
It is incompatible with life unless treated immediately and aggressively with lifelong enzyme and insulin replacement. But usually it's associated with other severe malformations.
And there's a genetic link?
Yes, the source notes this is linked to a homozygous germline mutation involving PDX1.
PDX1. That sounds like a movie file format.
It stands for pancreatic and duodenal homeobox 1. It's a homeobox transcription factor.
A transcription factor.
Think of it as the master switch, or the general contractor for pancreatic development. If that gene is broken, the instructions to build the pancreas are never sent. The organ just never shows up.
It really highlights how fragile the whole development process is. You need the genes to work, the rotation to happen, the ducts to fuse. So many steps just to get a working organ.
And that brings us back to the central theme here. Even if the anatomy forms perfectly, even if the ducts fuse and the rotation is correct, we still have that loaded gun sitting in the abdomen.
We still have the risk of the angry organ.
Exactly.
Right. Pancreatitis, we teased this at the beginning, the self-destruct sequence. The source is very clear about the definition here. Pancreatitis, whether acute or chronic, is fundamentally the failure of those safety locks we talked about.
That is the core mechanism. It is autodigestion.
So walk us through the disaster scenario. The safety pins, the zymogen inactivation, the remote activation, the SPINK1 inhibitor, they get overwhelmed. What happens next?
When those mechanisms fail, the enzymes, specifically trypsin, start activating inside the acinar cells or inside the ducts of the pancreas.
Uh-oh.
They don't wait to get to the gut. They wake up while they're still in the house.
And because they are designed to break down flesh.
They do exactly what they were programmed to do. They just do it to the wrong target. They start breaking down the pancreas itself.
Oh, man.
Trypsin activates the other enzymes. Phospholipase A starts queuing through the cell membranes of the acinar cells. Elastase starts dissolving the elastic fibers of the blood vessels.
It sounds like a chain reaction of destruction.
It triggers a massive inflammatory response. The body screams for help. White blood cells rush in, which releases more cytokines, causing more inflammation. It's a feedback loop.
The source describes the result of severe acute pancreatitis as a battlefield.
It is not an exaggeration. If you look at the pathology slides or the surgical field, in severe cases, you get acute hemorrhagic pancreatitis. The enzymes have dissolved the blood vessels, causing bleeding into the organ itself.
And you get fat necrosis. I saw that term.
You do. Fat necrosis.
What is that?
The liposes, the fat-digesting enzymes, leak out into the fat surrounding the pancreas and the abdomen. They digest the fat cells. When the fat breaks down, it releases fatty acids, which bind with calcium in the body. It forms these chalky white deposits.
White deposits.
Yes, we call it saponification.
Saponification, that's the process of making soap.
Literally, your body is turning its own fat into soap inside your abdomen. It creates these white, chalky lesions. It is a chaotic, destructive event.
And the pain must be.
It's described as excruciating, often radiating straight through to the back.
And it's not just a one-time pain, right? The source mentions a long-term risk if this keeps happening.
That's the chronic aspect. Acute pancreatitis is the immediate fire. Chronic pancreatitis is the burnt-out building left behind. If you have recurrent attacks or if you have that low-level obstruction from pancreas divisum we talked about, you aren't just suffering pain in the moment. You are permanently losing tissue.
The factory's getting demolished.
Exactly. The pancreas scars over. We call it fibrosis. As you lose the exocrine tissue, you lose the ability to make enzymes. This leads to malabsorption. You can't digest food properly.
So you could be eating but starving.
You might eat a huge meal, but you starve because you can't break it down.
And eventually does it hit the endocrine side? The islets?
It can. Late-stage chronic pancreatitis can destroy the islets of Langerhans, too.
No.
So not only can you not digest food, but you become diabetic. We sometimes call this type 3C diabetes or pancreatogenic diabetes.
Yeah, you could become diabetic effectively because you digested your own insulin factory.
That is the cruel reality.
Yeah.
The organ literally consumes itself to the point of total failure.
That is heavy. It really changes the way I look at this organ. I think I'll never look at my abdomen the same way again. It's not just a passive lump. It's a high-stakes chemical plant.
It really is. It's a masterpiece of biochemical engineering, but it operates on a knife's edge.
So let's try to wrap our heads around all of this. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Greek etymology to soap making in the abdomen. If we had to boil this deep dive down to the absolute essentials for our listener, what are we looking at?
I think there are 4 key pillars to take away. First, visualize the location.
Okay.
It's a bridge from the duodenum to the spleen, hidden deep in the retroperitoneum. It's hard to reach, and it's intimately connected to the gut and the blood supply.
Right. And don't be fooled by the name all flesh. It's a dual system.
Exactly. Pillar 2, the dual personality, 80% to 85% exocrine, the dangerous enzyme factory making the bombs.
And the other side?
1% to 2%, endocrine, the metabolic control room with the islets of Langerhans regulating your sugar.
Then we have the construction fails.
Pillar 3, the plumbing issues, pancreasdism, the failure of fusion causing a drainage traffic jam in up to 10% of people.
Which is so common.
Annular pancreas, the ring causing obstruction, ectopic tissue showing up where it shouldn't.
And finally, the danger, the explosion.
Pillar 4, autodigestion, the realization that pancreatitis is fundamentally the failure of the Saki mechanisms. the zymogens, the remote activation, and the stanakai-1 inhibitor. When those fail, the organ turns its weaponry on itself.
It's a sobering picture. We walk around every day worrying about traffic or emails or what to make for dinner. Meanwhile, right inside our abdomen, there is this incredibly complex biological standoff happening. We are carrying around a factory manufacturing explosive substances that can melt flesh and bone protected only by a few chemical safety pins, like spainium K1.
It speaks to the fragility and the brilliance of human biology. It works perfectly for decades for most of us, thanks to those microscopic safeguards. We take it for granted.
They do.
But diving into the pathology is a stark reminder that the balance is delicate. One gene mutation, one plumbing error, one blocked duct, and the system can collapse.
And that actually leaves us with a big question for next time. We've established that the gun is loaded. We've established that the safety can fail. But we haven't really talked about who pulls the trigger in a healthy person.
Yes.
The source hinted at alcohol and gallstones as the major instigators.
Those are the key culprits. Alcohol abuse and gallstones blocking the duct account for the vast majority of pancreatitis cases.
But why?
But the how and why they trigger that explosion, the molecular mechanism of how alcohol confuses the acinar cells, that is a complex story all on its own.
That sounds like a perfect topic for another deep dive. We'll save the triggers for part 2.
I look forward to that.
Until then, listeners, take care of your chemical factories. Be kind to your pancreas. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting down there in the dark.
Indeed. Respect the organ.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive.